The first cry pierced through the frozen morning air at exactly 6 a.m. Sarah Miller stood at her kitchen window, a steaming cup of coffee hovering inches from her lips. Every muscle in her body tensed. In her 15 years of living in this remote Montana home, she had never heard anything like it. The sound came again, a haunting wail that hovered between animal and human, sending a chill down her spine. The temperature outside had dropped to 30 degrees below zero, the coldest morning of the year. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering her property in 3 feet of pristine white powder. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across her backyard. That was when she saw it. Near her old garden shed, something massive lay half buried in the snow. At first, Sarah thought it was a fallen tree branch, but then it moved. Her breath caught in her throat as realization struck. Trapped in what appeared to be solid ice was an enormous grizzly bear. Its massive body was almost entirely encased in frozen snow, with only its head and one front paw free to move. Sarah watched in disbelief as the animal lifted its head and let out another cry. The sound made her skin crawl. It wasn't an aggressive roar or a threatening growl. It was something else entirely. A plea, a desperate call for help. Living in bear country had taught Sarah to be cautious around wildlife. At 52, she had seen her fair share of bears wandering through her property, especially during spring and fall. She knew the standard safety rules: make noise, keep your distance, never approach. But this was different. The bear was completely trapped, frozen in place by the freakish, cold snap that had hit overnight. As Sarah watched, the bear's eyes met hers through the window. In that moment, something passed between them that she couldn't explain. The animal's gaze held no wildness, no fury at being trapped. Instead, she saw something that seemed impossible: intelligence, awareness, and most disturbing of all, a deliberate attempt to communicate. The bear's cries grew weaker as the minutes passed, steam rising from its nostrils in diminishing puffs. Sarah realized the animal was growing exhausted. Without help, it would surely die, trapped in its icy prison. The nearest wildlife rescue was 2 hours away, and the roads were likely impassable after the heavy snowfall. Her mind screamed at her to stay inside, to let nature take its course, but something deep within her resisted. The bear's cry had awakened something in her, a sense that this moment was somehow important, somehow meant to be. Before she fully processed the decision, Sarah found herself reaching for her heavy winter coat and boots. Clutching a large pot of hot water and a shovel, she carefully made her way across the snow-covered yard. The bear's eyes tracked her movement, but its cries had grown weaker, coming in short, desperate gasps. 20 feet from the trapped animal, Sarah stopped, her heart pounding against her ribs. Up close, the grizzly was even larger than she had realized. Its frozen fur was covered in frost crystals that sparkled in the morning light. Taking a deep breath, she began pouring the hot water around the edges of the ice, watching as steam rose in thick clouds. The ice began to crack and splinter, but the bear remained unnaturally still, watching her work with an intensity that made her hands tremble. Its behavior defied everything she knew about wild animals. There was no panic, no thrashing, just those intelligent eyes following her every move. As the ice began to melt, Sarah noticed something odd. The snow around the bear had a strange bluish tint, unlike anything she had seen before. At first, she thought it might be a trick of the morning light, but as she moved closer, she realized the color was coming from beneath the bear. A faint glow, barely visible through the layers of ice and snow, pulsed beneath its massive body. The bear's eyes flickered toward the blue glow, then back to Sarah, as if trying to draw her attention to it. Another layer of ice cracked and fell away, and the glow intensified. Sarah's hands shook as she cleared away more snow, revealing what appeared to be a perfect circle of blue light beneath the trapped animal. It was about 6 feet in diameter, its surface smooth and unbroken, pulsing with an eerie luminescence. The morning sun climbed higher, but the temperature remained bitterly cold. Sarah's fingers were growing numb despite her thick gloves, and her breath came in frozen clouds. She had to work faster. The bear's breathing had become shallow, its eyes starting to droop. Whatever was causing that mysterious blue glow, she knew she had to free the animal first. After 4 more trips back to her house for hot water, She finally managed to melt enough ice around the bear's body. The blue circle beneath it was now clearly visible, pulsing with a light that seemed to come from deep within the ground itself. The bear's eyes were fully alert now, fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her take a step back. What happened next would become the most shocking moment of Sarah's life. As the last of the ice cracked away, the bear slowly rose to its feet. Sarah retreated several more steps, expecting the animal to either flee into the woods or possibly charge at her. Instead, the massive creature deliberately placed one paw on the edge of the glowing blue circle. The air around them suddenly felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. The bear looked directly at Sarah and did something that would haunt her dreams forever. It raised its right paw and, with deliberate purpose, gestured for her to come closer. Sarah stood frozen in place, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. The bear's gesture had been unmistakable, as deliberate as a human beckoning for help. The blue circle beneath its feet pulsed brighter, casting an otherworldly glow across the snow. Every survival instinct screamed at her to run, but something stronger kept her rooted to the spot. The bear made the gesture again, more urgently this time. As if responding to its movement, the blue light began to spread, creating a path between Sarah and the massive animal. The snow above the light started to melt, revealing something buried deep beneath her yard, something that explained why the bear had been so desperate for help. As more ice cracked away, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Beneath the melting snow, a metallic surface gleamed. A door, a perfectly circular, solid metal door about 10 feet in diameter, embedded deep into the frozen ground. Strange markings covered its surface, some of them familiar government hazard symbols, others more cryptic. The bear stepped aside, revealing the entire entrance. Sarah's pulse pounded as she took a hesitant step forward. The bear watched her, its deep brown eyes unreadable but expectant. It wasn't just asking for help. It had led her here. Up close, she could see that the warning signs weren't ordinary hazard symbols. They were official government markers, faded with age but still legible. The dates stamped across the top made her gasp. 1962. Suddenly, the bear's strange behavior made sense. This wasn't just any grizzly. This wasn't a random animal caught in the ice. This was something else entirely. The bear pressed its massive paw against a specific point on the metal surface. A deep mechanical whirring broke the morning silence, and the ground beneath them vibrated as the door began to move. Sarah stumbled backward as a gust of warm air rushed up from the opening chamber. The bear remained perfectly still, watching as the entrance slowly revealed itself. From below came another sound, soft at first, then rising in volume. Another cry, identical to the one that had first drawn Sarah outside. But this time, it wasn't coming from the bear in front of her. The cry was coming from beneath the ground. The cry that echoed from the depths below sent a shiver through Sarah's body, not from the cold, but from something deeper, an unshakable sense that she had stumbled upon something far beyond her understanding. The bear beside her remained still, watching her closely, as though waiting for her to make a decision. The metallic door had now fully opened, revealing a staircase descending into the earth, illuminated by the same eerie blue light that had been pulsing beneath the snow. The warm air rushing up from the entrance contrasted sharply with the biting cold of the Montana morning, carrying with it a strange, almost metallic scent. Sarah's fingers curled into fists inside her gloves, her instincts at war with her curiosity. Every rational part of her screamed that she should turn around, go back to the safety of her cabin, and call someone, anyone, who might understand what she had just uncovered. But she knew, deep down, that whatever this was, it wasn't something she could simply report to the local authorities. A government facility buried beneath her property? A bear with intelligence far beyond what should be possible? And now another cry for help from the depths of this hidden structure? No, this wasn't a situation she could walk away from. The bear took a step toward the open entrance, then looked back at her, waiting. Sarah swallowed hard. She could still turn back. She could pretend she had never seen any of this. But the weight of that thought felt heavier than her own fear. Slowly, she stepped forward, her boots crunching against the ice-covered ground. The bear seemed to acknowledge her decision with a slow, deliberate nod before turning and descending into the passageway. The first step down felt like stepping into another world. The air was noticeably warmer, and the blue glow lining the walls pulsed in a rhythmic pattern, almost like the heartbeat of something alive. Sarah trailed one hand along the metal walls as she followed the bear, feeling a faint hum vibrating beneath her fingertips. The staircase spiraled downward, each step revealing more of the strange underground facility. The walls were lined with thick cables, faded warning signs, and old, rusted pipes that dripped with condensation. It was clear that whatever this place was, it had been built a long time ago. The further they descended, the more Sarah became aware of another sound, a soft, mechanical hum that seemed to come from deep within the structure. It was accompanied by the occasional flicker of old monitors embedded in the walls, their screens coated in dust, displaying static-filled images and long-forgotten codes. She glanced at the bear, who moved with an unnerving familiarity, as though it had walked these halls many times before. At the bottom of the staircase, the passage opened into a massive underground chamber. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The space was unlike anything she had ever seen. Enormous steel support beams stretched across the ceiling, rusted but still holding strong. Banks of old computers lined the walls, their screens flickering with the same blue glow, displaying data she couldn't begin to decipher. But it was what stood in the center of the room that made her legs feel weak. A large containment area, surrounded by reinforced glass, held 3 more bears. They were identical to the one that had led her here, each wearing a worn leather collar, each watching her with the same unnerving intelligence. But these bears weren't trapped. They were moving with a precision that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. One of them pressed a massive paw against a control panel, activating a sequence of commands on the flickering monitors. Another bear seemed to be studying a set of old documents spread out across a metal table. These weren't just wild animals. They were working. Sarah took a step closer to the glass, her breath fogging up the reinforced surface. The bear she had freed from the ice let out a low, rumbling sound, and the others turned to face them. One of the bears inside the containment area stepped forward, raising its paw in the same deliberate gesture Sarah had seen above ground. It wasn't a random movement. It was communication. Her mind raced. How was this possible? The intelligence in their eyes, the coordinated way they moved, it was too much to process. Her gaze flickered to the metal table inside the containment area, where several documents lay open. Through the glass, she could make out the words stamped across the faded pages. Operation Sentinel. The bear beside her moved toward another console, pressing a sequence of buttons with a precision that defied everything Sarah knew about animals. A mechanical sound echoed through the chamber, and a hidden panel in the wall slid open, revealing a small room lined with filing cabinets and old surveillance equipment. Sarah hesitated, but the bear gestured again, urging her forward. Steeling herself, she stepped inside. The room smelled of dust and age, the scent of something long forgotten. Sarah ran her fingers over the cabinets, their labels peeling with time. Her eyes landed on a particular folder, its cover marked with a red, classified stamp. With trembling hands, she opened it. The first page was a government document dated 1962. It detailed a secret Cold War experiment, an initiative designed to create highly intelligent wildlife to guard sensitive government facilities hidden across the country. The project had been known as Project Guardian. The bears had been genetically enhanced, trained from birth to act as protectors of classified sites, able to operate simple machinery, recognize threats, and even coordinate with each other to maintain security. Sarah's stomach twisted as she flipped through the pages. The experiment had been deemed a success, far beyond what researchers had anticipated, but the final report suggested why it had been abandoned. Subjects exhibit cognitive abilities exceeding expected parameters. Decision-making processes are no longer strictly predictable. Subjects have begun developing independent operational strategies outside of program behavior. Project deemed unsustainable. Facility sealed indefinitely. The words sent a wave of unease through Sarah. The bears had become too intelligent, too independent. The government had shut down the project, sealing off the facility and leaving the bears to fend for themselves. But they hadn't simply disappeared. They had continued their work, maintaining the underground installation, passing their knowledge down through generations. A flicker of movement caught Sarah's attention. One of the bears inside the containment area had activated another monitor, displaying a satellite image of the surrounding mountains. Red markers pulsed across the screen. At first, Sarah didn't understand, but as she studied the image, her heart clenched. The markers weren't random. They were seismic readings. The bears hadn't just been maintaining this facility, they had been monitoring something, and whatever they were tracking, it wasn't good. Sarah turned to the bear beside her, realization dawning. "You weren't trapped by accident," she whispered. "You needed me to see this." The bear gave a slow, deliberate nod. Sarah's pulse pounded as she looked back at the screen. According to the data, a major earthquake was imminent, one strong enough to expose multiple hidden government installations buried across the region. If those sites were revealed, decades of government secrets would come to light. Her hand tightened around the folder. The bears had chosen her. She was the only person who knew about this, the only one who could warn someone before it was too late. But how could she explain this to the outside world? No one would believe her. The bear beside her let out a low, rumbling sound. Sarah didn't need words to understand the meaning. She had a choice to make: stay silent and walk away, or step forward and change everything. Her fingers hovered over the radio console on the desk, her mind racing. Then, taking a deep breath, she reached for the transmitter. "Forest Service, this is Sarah Miller," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I need to report something unusual." The bear watched her, waiting. The call had been made. There was no turning back now. Sarah's heart pounded as she waited for a response. The radio crackled with static, and for a moment, she feared the connection wouldn't go through. Then, a voice broke through. "Forest Service, this is Ranger Tom speaking. Who am I speaking with?" She swallowed hard, glancing at the bear beside her. The weight of what she was about to say pressed down on her chest. "This is Sarah Miller. I'm at my property on Pine Creek Road. I have access to some old government monitoring equipment, and I'm seeing signs of significant underground instability. I think we might be looking at a major event within the next 48 hours. There was a long pause. When Ranger Tom spoke again, his voice was more serious. "Ms. Miller, are you saying you have access to seismic monitoring equipment? Because we've had some unusual readings ourselves this morning. Where exactly are you getting this data?" Sarah hesitated. She couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. "There's an old research facility on my property," she said carefully. "I only just discovered it, but the equipment is still operational, and it's showing red level warnings." Another pause. Then, "Stand by, Ms. Miller. I'm going to put you through to someone who can assist." The line clicked, and the static shifted. A new voice came through, colder, more authoritative. "This is Colonel Richards, Special Operations Division. Ms. Miller, please confirm your location." Sarah's stomach tightened. Special Operations? The presence of military involvement sent a new wave of unease through her. This wasn't just a local matter. They already knew something. Yes, Pine Creek Road, about 15 miles north of Livingston," she said. "Do not move from your current location," Colonel Richards said, his voice sharp, urgent. "A team is being dispatched to your coordinates immediately." Sarah's breath caught. She glanced at the bear beside her, who had been listening intently. The other bears in the containment area had paused their activity, their intelligent eyes focused on her. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. She wasn't in control anymore. Within moments of the radio transmission, the bear that had led her here moved toward a secured panel embedded in the wall. With deliberate precision, it pressed its massive paw against a keypad, entering a code. A heavy, reinforced door slid open, revealing a new corridor lined with more ancient technology. Control panels, faded blueprints, and an entire wall filled with old paper files. The bear stepped aside, clearly wanting her to go inside. Sarah's pulse raced as she stepped forward, scanning the documents. Most were too technical for her to understand, filled with schematics and coded phrases. But one folder stood out. Its label read, Protocol Omega. Sarah's breath caught. The word Guardians wasn't referring to people. It was referring to the bears. Her eyes skimmed the pages, piecing together a horrifying truth. If a natural disaster threatened to expose the facility, the bears had been trained to seal it off, permanently. That meant destroying evidence, erasing data, and potentially even sealing themselves inside to prevent outsiders from uncovering the secrets hidden within. The weight of it made her knees weak. These creatures had been maintaining this place for decades, carrying out their programmed duties long after the government had abandoned them. But now they had broken protocol. Instead of sealing the facility, they had called for help. They had called for her. A deep rumbling sound echoed through the chamber, making the walls tremble. Sarah looked up in alarm. The seismic readings had been right. Something was shifting deep within the earth. The bear beside her let out a low growl, then turned toward the control panels, its massive paws moving with practiced precision. Screens flickered to life, revealing live footage of other underground facilities scattered across the region. Red warning symbols blinked over multiple locations. This wasn't just about her property. There were other hidden sites, all facing the same threat, and they were all about to be exposed. Sarah's mind raced. If these installations came to light, it wouldn't just be about government secrets. It would be about them. These bears, creatures of intelligence and purpose, would be discovered. What would happen to them? Would the government see them as allies or as liabilities? The bear made another deep sound, turning to her. She could almost feel its question. What now? She tightened her grip on the radio. Colonel Richards, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. How soon will your team arrive? ETA is 30 minutes, he replied. Ms. Miller, you need to stay where you are. Do not interfere with anything inside that facility. Understood? Sarah's fingers tightened around the radio. She glanced at the bear. Understood, she said. But it was a lie. She had 30 minutes. 30 minutes to make a decision that would change everything. Sarah's mind raced. She had 30 minutes before the military arrived, 30 minutes before this place, before these bears, fell under government control again. She wasn't naive. She knew how the world worked. Whatever had happened in 1962, whatever had led to the shutdown of Project Guardian, the government had chosen to bury it. If they had truly wanted to protect these creatures, they wouldn't have abandoned them in the first place. The bear beside her, her bear, she realized she had started thinking of it that way, watched her intently. It didn't speak, didn't move, but she could feel its silent question. What are you going to do? Her pulse pounded as she looked back at the control panels, at the flickering maps and red warning signals. She had access to something here, something that maybe even the government had lost track of. Could she do something before the military arrived? Could she change the outcome of whatever was coming? The bear made a low sound, a deep rumble that she felt in her bones. It turned toward a secondary console, pressing its massive paw against a scanner. The screen lit up, displaying files upon files of encrypted data. But the bear wasn't looking at the screen. It was looking at her. Sarah hesitated, then stepped forward. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. What was she looking for? Evidence? A way to protect the bears? A way to stop whatever final protocol had been put in place decades ago? She scrolled through the files, her eyes scanning rapidly. Most of them were old research logs, technical documents filled with terminology she barely understood. But then she found something different, a file labeled Last Directive. Her breath caught as she opened it. The message was brief. Final protocol authorization. Guardian units to self-contain in the event of human re-engagement. Ensure operational secrecy. Sarah's heart sank. It was exactly what she feared. If the military regained control of this place, the bears wouldn't fight back. They had been programmed to comply, to erase themselves if necessary. No, she whispered. No, no, no. She turned to the bear, her breath quickening. You knew, she said. That's why you broke protocol. You knew that if they found you again, it would be over. The bear didn't respond, but it didn't have to. The weight in its dark eyes was answer enough. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. If she could access this, maybe she could override it. Maybe she could break whatever obedience had been drilled into them so many decades ago. She searched frantically for security settings, command functions, anything that would let her undo what had been put in place. Then she found it, a subroutine labeled Guardian Override. Her hands shook as she clicked on it. A new screen opened, filled with complex coding and a single command input field. Enter authorization to release operative independence. Sarah stared at it. If she was reading this right, the bears weren't just intelligent. They were still controlled, still bound by whatever programming had been installed in them since birth. This wasn't just about physical containment. This was about free will. Her fingers hovered over the keys. The government had sealed this place off 60 years ago, had chosen to abandon these creatures instead of dealing with what they had become. And now, after all this time, the bears had made a different choice. They had reached out. They had trusted her. The radio crackled again. "Ms. Miller, this is Colonel Richards. Our team is 5 minutes out. Do you copy?" Sarah exhaled sharply. 5 minutes. Her gaze met the bears. She made her choice. Her fingers moved quickly, typing the words she hoped would work. Override protocol. Release autonomy. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the screen flashed. A confirmation message appeared. Command accepted. Operative independence activated. A deep vibration rippled through the room. The other bears inside the containment area suddenly stopped. Their movements became still, their heads turning in eerie unison as if something unseen had passed through them. Sarah's bear took a single step back, inhaling deeply. Then something shifted in its eyes. Something new. Something free. A heavy mechanical sound echoed through the chamber as the reinforced glass around the containment area retracted. The other bears stepped forward, no longer confined, no longer held within the invisible chains of obedience. Sarah had done it. She had set them free, and now there was nothing the government could do to stop it. The weight of what she had just done settled heavily on Sarah's chest. There was no undoing it. The bears, these impossibly intelligent creatures, were no longer bound by their programmed orders. Whatever control had once been imposed upon them was gone, and now, for the first time in over 60 years, they were free to decide their own fate. The air in the underground facility felt charged, thick with an energy Sarah couldn't quite describe. The other bears, the ones who had been trapped behind the glass, stepped forward cautiously. Their movements were different now, less mechanical, less constrained. They exchanged looks, a silent conversation passing between them, and then their eyes turned to Sarah. Her bear, the one she had rescued from the ice, moved closer. It was watching her, studying her, and she had the overwhelming sensation that something fundamental had changed. These weren't just animals. They weren't just remnants of a long-abandoned government project. They were something else entirely. Before Sarah could process what came next, the radio crackled again. "Ms. Miller!" Colonel Richards' voice came through, sharper now, filled with urgency. "We're on site. We have visual on your cabin. Where are you?" Sarah inhaled sharply. They were here. Her mind raced. She glanced at the bears, at the control panels, at the facility that had been hidden for decades beneath her home. If the military found this place, if they realized what had happened, what she had done, there was no telling what they would do next. She had to think fast. She pressed the radio's call button. "I'm inside," she said carefully, keeping her voice as calm as possible. There's a problem." Silence. Then, "What kind of problem?" Sarah hesitated. She could lie. She could try to stall them. But these were military operatives. They wouldn't wait. They wouldn't hesitate. And once they saw the open facility, the freed bears, the deactivated containment system, there would be no going back. A deep, rumbling sound filled the chamber. The bears were moving. Not in fear, not in aggression, but with purpose. Sarah didn't know how, but she could feel it. They had been waiting for this moment. And now that it had arrived, they weren't going to let themselves be captured again. Her bear turned toward a large terminal at the far end of the chamber. It pressed a paw against a control panel, and suddenly alarms began flashing across the screens. A new alert appeared in bold red letters. "Emergency evacuation protocol engaged." Sarah barely had time to react before the ground trembled beneath her feet. The facility was shutting down. Massive steel doors began sliding into place over key access points. Control panels flickered as systems powered down. The decades-old machinery that had kept this place running was going dark. The bears weren't just leaving. They were erasing everything. Sarah's eyes widened. "Wait," she shouted. "If you do this—" Her words were cut off by a sudden roar of activity. The bears moved swiftly, their massive forms gliding through the chamber with eerie coordination. They pressed against hidden panels, sealing access routes, covering their tracks. It was like watching an orchestrated retreat. And then Sarah understood. They had always known this day would come. They had prepared for it. Before she could react, her bear turned toward her, pressing its forehead briefly against her shoulder, a gesture that felt almost like a farewell. Then with a final glance, it turned and moved toward an unseen exit, disappearing into the shadows. The others followed. One by one, the bears vanished into the depths of the facility, leaving Sarah standing alone in the dim, fading light. She barely had time to process what had happened before the radio in her hand exploded with sound. "Ms. Miller!" Colonel Richard's voice was urgent now. "We just lost all readings on the site. What the hell is happening down there?" Sarah took a slow, shaky breath. The facility was gone. Not physically, but as far as anyone on the outside was concerned, it might as well have never existed. She raised the radio to her lips. I don't know," she said, voice unsteady but firm. "The system just shut down." Another pause, then, "We're coming in." Sarah turned toward the now dark chamber, her pulse hammering. Whatever the military found when they got here, it wouldn't be the truth, because the truth had already escaped into the night. The silence that followed Colonel Richard's words was suffocating. Sarah's grip on the radio tightened as she glanced around the now darkened facility. The glowing blue lights were gone. The hum of machinery had faded into nothing. The massive control panels that had once displayed data, warnings, and seismic activity now sat lifeless. It was as if the place had been abandoned for decades, untouched and forgotten. But Sarah knew the truth. The bears had wiped everything. Their movements had been swift, calculated, deliberate. Whatever information, technology, or evidence existed in this facility had been erased in minutes. They had left behind nothing but cold, dead metal and empty rooms. And now the military was coming. She took a deep breath and forced herself to think. What would they do when they arrived? They would search, analyze, interrogate, but they wouldn't find them. The bears had made sure of that. The radio crackled again. "Miss Miller, do you copy? We are entering the structure." Her heart pounded as she turned toward the main passageway, toward the metal staircase leading back to the surface. Footsteps echoed from above, heavy, measured, military. Shadows stretched across the walls as beams of light swept through the space, cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Sarah steeled herself. A group of soldiers descended the stairs in perfect formation, their movements precise, their weapons slung across their backs but ready to be used at a moment's notice. Leading them was Colonel Richards. He was taller than she expected, his presence commanding. His eyes, sharp and assessing, locked onto her immediately. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice cool but firm. "Report." Sarah forced herself to stay calm. I was inside when the system powered down. The facility just shut off." Richard's gaze flicked around the chamber, taking in the darkened screens, the stillness of the space. "What exactly did you do before that happened?" Sarah hesitated. "I accessed some of the old files. There was a security alert. Then the whole place went dark." Richard studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded toward one of the soldiers. "Get a system scan running. I want every trace of data left in this facility analyzed." A soldier stepped forward, kneeling beside one of the lifeless terminals. He pulled a compact device from his pack, connected it to the console, and began running an extraction sequence. The screen remained dark, unresponsive. "Sir," the soldier said after a minute, "there's nothing here. No active logs, no system framework. It's like the entire database was wiped." Richard's jaw tensed. His gaze snapped back to Sarah. "How much do you know about this place?" he asked. Sarah chose her words carefully. "Not much. I didn't even know it existed until this morning." Richards didn't look convinced. "You said you accessed files. What did you see?" Sarah forced herself to meet his eyes. "Just old reports, technical documents. Nothing I could really understand." Richards studied her, the weight of his scrutiny pressing down on her like an invisible force. Sarah held her breath, waiting. If he suspected the truth, if he even had the slightest inkling of what had really happened, this conversation could take a very different turn. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Richards exhaled sharply. He turned to his team. Sweep the area. If there's anything left, I want to find it. The soldiers spread out, methodically searching the chamber, checking behind panels, running their hands over old walls, tapping at the floor for hidden compartments. They were thorough. Sarah's fingers twitched at her sides, but she forced herself to stay still, to keep breathing evenly. They wouldn't find anything. The bears had seen to that. She could only pray that they were far away by now. As the soldiers worked, Richards paced toward one of the terminals, running a hand over its dust-covered surface. He looked at Sarah again. There's something off about this, he muttered. This place should have been a goldmine of data, but it's empty. Almost like... He trailed off, his expression darkening. Almost like someone had made sure it couldn't be found. Sarah didn't react. She couldn't. Richards exhaled sharply. For now, we'll assume the site was automatically purged as a failsafe. But if you do remember anything useful, you will contact me immediately. Sarah nodded. Of course. But she wouldn't, because she had already made her decision. One of the soldiers approached. Sir, no physical traces left behind. The place is clean. Richard scowled. Fine. We'll set up remote monitoring in case anything changes. But for now, this facility is officially decommissioned. He turned back to Sarah. Miss Miller, you'll be escorted back to your cabin. I suggest you stay out of restricted sites in the future. Sarah forced a small, nervous nod. Understood. They led her back up the staircase, back through the icy air of the Montana morning. The snow had begun to fall again, light but steady, erasing the footprints that had led her here. As they reached her cabin, she cast one last glance toward the spot where the bear had been trapped. The snow had covered the area once more. If she hadn't known better, she would have thought nothing had ever been there at all. But she knew, and somewhere out there, so did they. That night, long after the military had left, after the facility had been sealed, Sarah stood by her window, staring into the darkness. The wind howled through the trees, the distant mountains standing as silent sentinels against the night sky. And then she saw it. A massive shadow moved at the edge of the tree line. Sarah's breath caught. The shape was unmistakable. The bear. Her bear. It didn't come closer. It simply stood there, watching, acknowledging her. And then slowly, it turned and disappeared into the forest. Sarah exhaled, pressing a hand to her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. They weren't gone. They had simply stepped out of sight, still watching, still guarding, and if the world ever needed them again, they would be ready.